This ghetto trash doesn't deserve to fly. Gate agent Brenda Martinez hissed the words like venom, her voice slicing through the airport chatter. In her hand, the match flared to life, its orange flame snapping upward, hungry and alive. She brought it dangerously close to Maya Johnson's burgundy passport, holding it over the cold metal rim of a wastebasket as if it were nothing more than garbage. Brenda's thick fingers gripped the document tightly, savoring the moment. Her eyes locked on Maya's face, and in that cruel stare was pure delight. She wanted Maya to break, to cry, to beg, to fall apart in front of strangers. Maya's breath caught in her chest. Her heart hammered so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Around her, the gate area froze. People turned, jaws open, phones flying out of pockets and bags, screens lit up everywhere, recording every second of the horror. Passengers gasped, whispering, "Is she really burning it?" With a sweep of her forearm, Brenda shoved Maya's boarding pass off the counter. The small slip of paper fluttered helplessly, tumbling through the air until it landed on the dirty floor. A black shoe stepped too close, smearing a faint print across its surface. "Pick it up, honey," Brenda sneered, her lip curling with twisted satisfaction. "On your knees." The flame kissed the passport's corner. Gold letters began to bubble, black smoke, curling upward like a dark spirit. A piece of Maya's identity, her travel, her freedom, her proof of existence, was turning to ash right before her eyes. "Stop filming!" Brenda barked at the crowd. Her voice was sharp, commanding, but the passengers ignored her. Cameras only zoomed closer. Some had already gone live. Maya's messenger bag slipped from her shoulder and dropped to her side. Inside, her government ID and credentials stayed hidden, unseen by the mob around her. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. The flame grew. The corner of the passport burst into orange fire. Plastic shriveled, pages curled. Years of visas and stamps, proof of a life lived across continents, turned black and brittle in seconds. "There we go," Brenda cooed, smiling as she dropped the burning document into the wastebasket. The flames licked upward, devouring Maya's photo, the federal seal melting into unrecognizable shapes. "Problem solved." Maya's throat tightened, but her voice was steady. "You just destroyed a federal document." "I destroyed a fake," Brenda shot back instantly, crossing her arms. Her chest swelled with smug pride. "That's what we do to trash in first class." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones stayed raised, recording everything. From the back of the gate, a teenager named Sarah Carter clutched her phone high, live streaming to nearly 30,000 viewers. Comments exploded across her feed in real time. "OMG, she actually burned it! Call the FBI now! This is insane!" The boarding display flickered. Flight 447, boarding in 38 minutes. At Maya's hip, her government-issued phone buzzed, the screen flashing. "DC Director, urgent." She didn't move. She couldn't. All eyes were locked on her, waiting for her next move. Smoke drifted higher, swirling against the ceiling. Overhead, sensors blinked red. A maintenance worker rushed over with a fire extinguisher, but Brenda waved him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Just document disposal," she announced coldly. Nothing to worry about. But passengers weren't convinced. Business traveler Marcus Webb raised his phone from the seating area, already live on TikTok. His caption read, "Racist gate agent burns woman's passport at O'Hare." Within minutes, passport burning was trending. Maya finally knelt, retrieving her boarding pass from the filthy floor. Dirt smudged across the paper. Shoe prints stained the surface. She rose slowly, boarding pass in hand, her dignity intact despite the humiliation. "Stay down there," Brenda snapped, her grin wide. "It suits you better." The crowd erupted, some in outrage, some in agreement, all with cameras rolling. Maya straightened to her full height. Her first-class ticket bore a faint federal priority stamp in the corner. In her bag, hidden but very real, her FAA inspector badge hung from its chain. "Ma'am, I need to board this flight," Maya said, her voice calm but cutting. "Not with burned documents, you don't," Brenda retorted, poking the smoldering remains in the bin with a pen. "Look at this. Cheap foreign printing always burns fast." The pages had separated in the fire. Official stamps from around the world curled and collapsed into dust. Maya swallowed the ache in her throat. "I can verify my identity through the system." "System's down," Brenda lied smoothly. She leaned closer, her tone dripping poison. "Besides, people with fake passports usually carry fake IDs too. What's next? A counterfeit driver's license?" Maya's phone buzzed. Again. This time the screen read, "Federal Marshal's Office." Airport Security Officer Mike Torres pushed through the crowd, drawn by smoke and shouting. His eyes went straight to the burning passport remains, and without hesitation, he turned suspicion on Maya. "What's the situation here?" he demanded. "Fraudulent documents already disposed of," Brenda said proudly, gesturing toward the wastebasket. "This woman was attempting to board with fakes." Mike glanced at Maya. His brow hardened. "Ma'am, did you bring fake documents to the airport?" "They were legitimate federal documents," Maya answered firmly. "Sure they were," Brenda snorted, her voice thick with sarcasm. "That's why they burned like paper napkins. Real passports don't do that." Some passengers nodded in agreement. A woman in pearls whispered, "Good catch. These scammers are getting bold." But younger travelers recorded furiously, calling out Brenda's racism and lies. Sarah Carter's live stream hit 89,000 viewers. Comments scrolled faster than she could read. "FBI needs to get here now. Arrest that gate agent. This is criminal." Through it all, Maya stayed silent, clutching her dirt-stained boarding pass, her bag pressed close against her side where her hidden badge gleamed in secret. The boarding screen updated again. "Flight 447, boarding in 32 minutes. Supervisor Janet Phillips finally arrived, alerted by passenger complaints and the smoke. Her eyes took in the scene. The wastebasket full of charred remains, the crowd of recording passengers, the security, presence, and Maya standing quietly amid the chaos. "What happened here?" Janet demanded. "Fraud attempt," Brenda declared proudly, chest puffed out. "Documents destroyed per protocol. I protected our airline." Janet bent over the wastebasket. Among the ashes, pieces of Maya's photo still clung to melted fragments, enough to see her face, even through the blackened edges. Janet turned sharply to Maya. "Ma'am, attempting to board with fraudulent documents is a federal crime. You'll need to be detained." Maya's phone buzzed again in her palm. This time the display flashed red. "FAA emergency line." "I need to take this call," Maya said firmly. "You need to cooperate," Janet snapped back coldly. "Criminals don't get phone privileges." The crowd gasped. Security officers pressed. Closer. Smoke still curled from the wastebasket. The gold eagle emblem on the passport cover had melted completely. Years of Maya's life, her travels, her clearances, her immunity, had dissolved into ash. Brenda basked in the chaos, her smile sharp as glass. "It's always the quiet ones who try the biggest scams," she announced to everyone listening. "Good thing I know how to spot fakes." Maya's grip tightened on her bag. Inside, her true identity waited, an identity powerful enough to flip the entire situation upside down. But for now, she stood silent, letting the world believe the lie a little longer. Gate manager Tom Rodriguez rushed over, his senses immediately struck by the acrid, suffocating smell of burning paper. The moment he reached the gate, his eyes darted around, taking in the scene in quick snapshots. The smoldering wastebasket, the faint stream of smoke curling upward toward the ceiling vents, the cluster of uniformed security officers standing tense, and the swelling crowd of passengers all with phones raised recording every second. The atmosphere buzzed with nervous energy, whispers mixing with the sharp hum of airport announcements echoing through the terminal. "What the hell is burning at my gate?" Tom barked, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to command. "Fraudulent. Documents," Supervisor Janet replied with rehearsed efficiency, her tone cold and clipped. "Agent Brenda intercepted this passenger attempting to board with fake identification. Evidence has already been destroyed for safety." Brenda stood taller, folding her arms with exaggerated pride, as though she had just saved the airline from catastrophe. But Tom's eyes dropped to the wastebasket. The sight froze him. Among the blackened ash lay the warped remnants of a passport. Half of a face, blurred but unmistakably human, stared up from the ruins. The golden federal seal had melted into strange metallic droplets, pooling at the steel bottom like tears of gold. "Ma'am," Tom said gravely, turning his gaze to Maya, "you brought fake documents to a federal facility. That's a serious federal crime." Maya's phone vibrated at her hip, buzzing insistently. She glanced down and saw the display flash. Homeland Security. Priority call. Her fingers twitched toward it instinctively. "Don't touch that phone, Officer Mike," Torres snapped, stepping forward with authority. "Suspects don't get to make calls until we sort this out." The crowd reacted instantly, their phones capturing the clash. Sarah Carter's live stream count had skyrocketed, 247,000 live viewers. Her comments section was a frenzy of outrage, scrolling so fast it was unreadable. "That's illegal. Document destruction is a federal crime. She's destroying evidence, not protecting it." The digital boarding display blinked above their heads. "Flight 447. Boarding in 26 minutes. Additional security personnel moved in, forming a loose but visible perimeter around Maya as if she were some dangerous threat. Yet Maya sat calmly in her chair, her hands visible resting in her lap. Her messenger bag, however, had shifted with the commotion. The thin chain attached to her badge was now more visible than before, catching small glints of light as she moved. "Look at her," Brenda said loudly to the growing crowd, her voice thick with disdain. "Acting all calm. Classic criminal behavior. They think if they just sit there and don't react, we'll believe their lies." The passengers murmured. Some nodded in agreement. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Business traveler Marcus Webb, now streaming on Facebook Live to his professional network, narrated in a low, incredulous tone, "This is insane. An airport employee literally burned someone's passport because she assumed it was fake. But not everyone sided with Maya." An older man with silver hair and a cane muttered approvingly, "Good for her. These fraudsters need to be stopped before they scam more people." Tom crouched slightly and peered deeper into the wastebasket. The ashes didn't look like amateur forgeries. Even charred fragments of watermarks, microtext, and security fibers remained visible. They looked too intricate to be fakes. "These seem surprisingly detailed for counterfeit documents," he muttered under his breath. Brenda's confident smile flickered, just slightly. "High-quality fakes," she insisted quickly. "That's how they trick people. Sophisticated forgery. I've seen them before." At that moment, Maya's phone rang again. This time, the tone was unmistakably distinct, a sharp-coded sequence. That carried weight. Several passengers turned their heads at once. "That's a government phone," a woman in military fatigues remarked aloud. "I've heard that alert in federal facilities. It's for high-priority calls." "Criminals steal government phones too," Brenda countered instantly, desperation leaking into her words. "Probably part of her whole fraud operation." Before Maya could reply, Flight Attendant Coordinator Lisa Park arrived with the crew, trailed by Captain James Morrison, his pilot's uniform crisp and his expression stern. He glanced around the smoky gate with concern. "We've got smoke at my boarding gate and security intervention." "What's happening here?" he demanded. "Document fraud investigation," Tom replied firmly. "Passenger attempted to board with burned fake identification." "Burned?" Morrison repeated, his brow furrowing. Why would fake documents be burned? Because they were obviously fake, Brenda said, her tone clipped, trying to shut down the question. Real passports don't burn like that. Maya finally raised her voice, clear and steady. Sir, all paper-based documents burn when exposed to flame. That's simple science. The material doesn't make them fireproof. Morrison's gaze lingered on her. Her calm, precise response, so measured, so professional, did not sound like the frantic denial of a guilty person. His instincts told him something was wrong with this picture. The boarding screen flashed again. Flight 447, boarding in 22 minutes. Maya's phone screen lit up. 17 missed calls. Everyone from federal agencies. Her messenger bag had shifted further now. The gold chain of her badge was almost fully visible. Ma'am, what's that badge in your bag? Asked Officer Jennifer Walsh, noticing the glint. Maya glanced down briefly, then back up. Personal identification, she said evenly. More fake IDs, Brenda crowed triumphantly, seizing the moment. She probably has a whole collection of them. Tom extended a hand toward Maya's bag. We'll need to examine all identification you're carrying. Maya's voice dropped quiet, but her tone cut through the noise. I'd prefer to handle my credentials myself. Criminals don't get preferences, Janet snapped, her face hard. You lost that right the second you brought fake documents into a federal facility. The live stream audience had ballooned to over 400,000 viewers across platforms. Twitter and TikTok feeds exploded with hashtags. Passport burning and airport racism. Thousands of comments demanded investigations, firings, and arrests. Captain Morrison's radio buzzed. Flight 447, this is Tower Control. You've got extended ground delay at your gate. What's going on down there? Roger, Tower, Morrison replied. We're in the middle of a document investigation. Copy that. Keep us updated. Maya's eyes flickered toward the wastebasket. A small gust from the air conditioning vent stirred the ashes, scattering black flakes across the polished tile floor. Her diplomatic visa page, once proof of her, clearance to enter restricted zones worldwide, was now nothing more than fragile dust blowing at strangers' feet. This is taking too long, complained a sharp-voiced first-class passenger. Just remove her so the rest of us can board. Federal protocol requires thorough investigation, Tom said firmly. Document fraud is no small matter. But while he spoke, Maya's bag had shifted completely. The FAA inspector badge was now fully visible, glinting in the harsh gate. Lighting. Yet the gate staff and most of the officers were too focused on her face, her stillness, her silence. Brenda jabbed her pen into the ashes again. Look how completely it burned. Cheap foreign materials. Probably printed in some basement. A new figure entered the scene. Airport Police Officer Derek Carter. He approached slowly, eyes sharp as he studied the burned remains. He crouched near the bin, examining what little was left. Ma'am, Carter said carefully, these don't look like amateur fakes. Federal passports are designed with specific features. Even burned, they leave unique patterns in the ash. These ashes look legitimate. Brenda's face reddened. Her voice shot up in volume. I know fake documents when I see them. 15 years of experience. Experience doesn't rewrite chemistry, Maya replied calmly, her voice steady as stone. All organic compounds combust at similar temperatures. That's not opinion. That's fact. Officer Carter studied her more closely now. Her technical vocabulary, her composure under fire, her refusal to panic, it didn't align with the behavior of a fraud suspect. Something about her screamed professional. The display flickered again. Flight 447, boarding in 18 minutes. Maya's phone rang once more. This time, the emergency ringtone pierced through the chatter, commanding attention. Several passengers recognized it instantly. That's a government priority phone, the woman in fatigues confirmed. I know that sound. Stolen government property, Brenda snapped desperately, her voice cracking under the pressure. Part of her scheme. Don't, Be fooled! But now Maya's bag had shifted enough for the truth to glimmer in plain sight. The badge's golden eagle emblem caught the harsh fluorescent lights. Unmistakable, undeniable. Officer Carter's eyes locked onto it. He straightened, his voice level, but waited. "Ma'am, what kind of identification do you have in your bag?" The crowd leaned forward. Phones zoomed in. The air itself felt heavy with anticipation. Maya lifted her head, her calm gaze sweeping across the sea of doubters. Her lips parted, her words deliberate. "Federal, identification, officer." The phrase dropped into the room like a thunderclap. Brenda's smug confidence wavered, her smirk faltering into something brittle. Tom's jaw tightened as he stepped closer, trying to confirm with his own eyes. Janet narrowed hers, suspicion and dawning realization battling across her face. "Captain." Morrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of command. "What kind of federal identification exactly?" And the gate fell silent. Maya reached for her messenger bag with the deliberate steadiness of someone who knew the weight of every eye upon her. Hundreds of passengers leaned forward, their phones raised high, capturing every second for an audience that had already swelled. To more than 500,000 viewers online, social media platforms were exploding with hashtags, theories, and accusations, the digital world holding its breath in anticipation of what credentials would emerge from the woman whose passport had just been reduced to ashes. The air around Gate B12 seemed to still as she unfastened the strap. With practiced composure, Maya slid out a leather credential wallet, the kind that carried an unmistakable gravity even before it was opened, and placed it squarely on the counter, beside the smoldering wastebasket where her identity had been incinerated moments earlier. The gold FAA eagle emblem embossed on its surface caught the harsh gate lighting, gleaming like a silent verdict. Slowly, deliberately, she flipped the wallet open. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Inside, her federal identification card gleamed with undeniable authority. The holographic seals shifted under the light, official signatures glimmered, and beneath, the bold header it read clearly, "Maya Johnson, Chief Inspector, Federal Aviation Administration, Criminal Enforcement Division." For a moment, silence didn't merely fall over Gate B12. It crashed down like a physical weight. Brenda's pen slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a sharp clatter that echoed louder than the dozens of recording phones. Her face, drained of color, her lips parting soundlessly as her eyes darted over the letters again and again, as if the words themselves might rearrange into something less damning. That's not possible," she whispered, her voice hollow, broken and stripped of the smug certainty she had wielded moments earlier. Maya didn't pause. She set down a second document beside the first, a Department of Transportation Enforcement authorization stamped with the very same seal Brenda had dismissed as fake, a seal that only minutes earlier had melted into metallic droplets in the wastebasket when her passport was burned. "Chief Inspector Maya Johnson," she said evenly, her voice calm but carrying the unmistakable cadence of authority. "Federal Aviation Administration, Criminal Investigation Unit, badge number 4782, Federal Law Enforcement Authority under Title 49, U.S. Code, Section 44701. The gate manager. Tom's hands shook as he picked up the credentials, his eyes wide as they scanned every security feature, every hologram, every layered watermark designed to be impossible to replicate. The authenticity was unquestionable. His voice trembled when he finally spoke. "You're a federal agent?" "Chief Inspector," Maya corrected sharply, locking eyes with him. "And you just stood by while your employee destroyed federal identification during an active undercover investigation, on live stream no less." Janet, her composure unraveling, snatched the credentials as if desperation alone might expose some flaw. Her hands shook as she turned the card under the light. But the Department of Transportation letterhead was genuine. The prosecutor liaison contact was real. Maya's photograph stared back with the confidence of someone who knew this moment was inevitable. Janet's denial rose like a drowning gasp. This has to be fake too. It's more fraudulent documents. Without hesitation, Maya pulled her government-issued tablet from her bag. Her fingers moved swiftly, unlocking it with biometric clearance. She held it out for all to see. Would you like to verify my credentials through the Federal Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act database? My commission number is FA 7829024. You can run it yourself. Officer Carter stepped forward now, his trained eyes reading the scene with a clarity the others lacked. He had recognized her calm, her technical language, her precision under pressure. Now the credentials confirmed what instinct had already told him. His voice carried respect. Ma'am, Chief Inspector, I deeply apologize for this entire misunderstanding. But Maya raised her hand, silencing him with the composure of someone who had been silencing excuses her entire career. You followed your role as security officer. You will not be faulted. Miss Martinez, however... She turned her eyes on Brenda, whose knees buckled slightly under the weight of the gaze. Committed multiple federal crimes on live video witnessed by more than 500,000 people. Brenda's eyes fell to the ash-covered wastebasket, as if it might swallow her whole. Her lips quivered. I didn't know. It looked fake. The quality. I thought, Miss Martinez, Maya interrupted, her tone precise and merciless. Legitimate federal documents look legitimate, because they are legitimate. There is no visual difference between my passport and any other passport issued by the State Department. What you destroyed wasn't suspicious. It was authentic. Maya pulled her official notebook, writing with crisp strokes as if each word hammered nails into Brenda's fate. Employee Brenda Martinez, badge number 4471, deliberately destroyed federal identification at 7:23 a.m. Central Time. Physical evidence, ashes of federal passport in gate wastebasket. Witnesses, approximately 200 passengers. Remote digital witnesses, over 600,000 across TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, documented in real time. Captain Morrison, who had watched the entire collapse with dawning horror, now stepped forward, voice measured. Chief Inspector, how can we assist your investigation? You can start, Maya replied without looking up from her notes, by preserving the crime scene evidence. Those ashes are no longer trash. They are federal evidence in a criminal prosecution. Gasps rose from the crowd. Sarah's live stream viewership surged past 600,000, comments scrolling faster than screens could display them. She's FBI, one comment screamed. She burned a federal agent's passport. Federal crime on live TV. Maya's phone rang again with the piercing, distinctive tone that made military personnel flinch instinctively. This time she answered in full view. Johnson here. Yes, Director. The operation is proceeding as planned. Document destruction occurred as anticipated. Evidence collected from digital sources. Approximately 200 direct witnesses, 600,000 remote. Chain of custody established. Federal Response Team ETA 8 minutes. Understood. She ended the call as Tom's face turned a ghostly white. Federal Response Team, he muttered, as if the words themselves carried the weight of judgment. Maya lifted her eyes, addressing the room with clinical finality. Under 18 U.S.C., Section 1361, destruction of government property carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in federal prison and fines up to $250,000. When that destruction targets federal law enforcement credentials during an active investigation, sentencing guidelines recommend the maximum. Additional charges under Section 1505 for obstruction of federal proceedings carry up to 5 years each. The passengers murmured, horrified and electrified all at once. Every recording phone captured the moment Brenda Martinez's career and freedom collapsed in public view. She slumped into a chair, her eyes locked on the gray ashes she herself had created. The fragments of Maya's passport clung to her uniform like evidence that refused to let her go. Officer Carter, sober and respectful, asked the one question on everyone's mind. "Chief Inspector, what kind of investigation were you conducting?" "Here?" Maya snapped her notebook shut and looked him in the eye. "Systematic discrimination in airline operations, specifically document challenges based on appearance rather than legitimate protocol. And today," she said, sweeping her gaze across the gate, "we obtained the most devastating evidence possible. Live, unfiltered, and undeniable." The irony settled over the crowd like a thunderclap. Brenda's racially biased suspicion had not just derailed a federal agent's travel, it had exposed the exact corruption Maya had come to investigate. And now, with ashes at her feet and 500,000 witnesses watching, there was no way out. The evidence of Brenda Martinez's federal crimes was no longer abstract. It was literally clinging to her body. Ashes from a U.S. passport, flakes of blackened paper with faint glimmers of melted holograms, coated her uniform like the residue of guilt itself. Every passenger watching could see it. Every camera recording could magnify it. Every online viewer could screen capture it. She was branded in real time by the physical remains of the federal document she had destroyed. Maya's. Phone rang again, its tone unmistakable. Sharp, urgent, and coded for government personnel. She glanced briefly at the caller ID. Her voice was calm but edged with finality as she announced, "U.S. Marshals Service, ETA 6 minutes." Her eyes swept back toward Brenda, who sat paralyzed in her chair, shoulders slumped as though her uniform had suddenly become a lead weight. "Your federal arrest team is on its way, Ms. Martinez," Maya said evenly, each word carrying the resonance of judgment. "I strongly recommend you remain calm and cooperative during the detention process. Resistance will only add charges." Passengers held their breath. Phones trembled in dozens of hands as the live streams ticked upward into unprecedented numbers. Nearly 1 million people now watched in stunned fascination as the power dynamic, once tilted against Maya, had completely inverted. The woman who had been humiliated, accused, and stripped of her identity was now revealed as one of the most powerful federal law enforcement officials in aviation security. The crowd saw her differently now, not as a suspect, but as a prosecutor. Not as a victim, but as the one holding the scales of justice in her hands. Maya bent down gracefully, her movements slow and deliberate, and retrieved a charred fragment from the floor. It was all that remained of her passport photo. Half, her face burned away, a haunting image of what had been destroyed. Yet in her other hand, her inspector's badge gleamed with untouched authority, a symbol that no fire could erase. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The hunter had become the hunted. The accused had become the accuser. The entire sequence was being captured in high definition from dozens of angles, preserved forever in digital memory. The heavy boots of the U.S. Marshals echoed through the terminal before they were seen. A hush swept across the gate area as uniformed deputies in tactical gear emerged, cutting through the crowd like a knife. At their head was Deputy Marshal Rebecca Santos, her stance firm, her expression unreadable. She approached Maya with professional deference. "Chief Inspector Johnson, U.S. Marshals reporting as ordered. We're here to execute the federal arrest warrant." Maya inclined her head toward Brenda without ceremony. "Miss Martinez, employee badge 4471, federal document destruction, obstruction of justice, interference with an active federal investigation. She is the subject of the warrant." Before the marshals could act, a commotion rippled through the crowd. A woman in a tailored but wrinkled $3,000 suit forced her way forward, flanked by a cadre of lawyers carrying tablets and leather briefcases. Patricia Hawthorne, corporate vice president of operations, had just been flown in by emergency helicopter from headquarters. Her expression was tight, her voice sharp as she turned on Tom, the gate manager. "What is the extent of our legal exposure?" Before Tom could stumble through an answer, Maya's voice cut through with devastating precision. She lifted her tablet and displayed statutes like a surgeon revealing X-rays of a terminal diagnosis. Under 18 U.S.C., Section 1361, your employees' willful destruction of federal property carries criminal penalties of up to 10 years imprisonment and fines of $250,000. Corporate liability under vicarious responsibility doctrine could reach $50 million. Patricia froze, her carefully cultivated composure faltering. $50 million, she stammered. That's only the criminal exposure, Maya continued without pause, her voice a scalpel of authority. Civil rights violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 carry unlimited damage potential. Federal contract violations tied to civil rights breaches could result in suspension of your operating certificates at all 127 airports where your airline currently holds gates. The words landed like explosives. Patricia's legal team began furiously typing, calculating the financial devastation in real time. Senior counsel Marcus Webb leaned close to her, whispering in urgent tones. Our annual revenue is $28.7 billion. If federal contracts are suspended, we're looking at losses of $847 million per month. Maya swiped her tablet, bringing up more damning numbers. Your airline processes 2.3 million passengers through O'Hare each month. Each proven discrimination incident carries potential damages of $1.2 to $2 million under federal precedent. Ms. Martinez's personnel file contains 17 prior complaints for discriminatory document challenges. Tom's face drained of blood, his voice cracked. We had complaints about her before? That many? 17 documented complaints over the last 14 months, Maya confirmed, her tone clinical, relentless. All involving passengers of color, all dismissed by management without investigation. This demonstrates a clear pattern of deliberate indifference to civil rights violations. Patricia snatched the file from Tom's shaking hands, her eyes darting through the damning pages, while her lawyers read over her shoulder. The complaints painted a devastating picture. Repeated accusations of discriminatory treatment, excessive, document scrutiny, racially biased comments, and every one of them ignored. Counsel whispered grimly, "This creates corporate liability under Section 1983, deliberate indifference to constitutional violations." The crowd parted again as federal prosecutors arrived, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kim. Maya briefed him with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed every word. Complete video documentation from 19 separate sources. Over 800,000 online viewers witnessed the federal crime live. Physical evidence secured. 17 prior complaints establishing corporate knowledge. Prosecutor Kim examined the burned remains in the wastebasket, nodding slowly. This is prosecutorial gold. A federal crime committed against a federal agent during a civil rights investigation, captured on live stream video with corporate knowledge of prior misconduct. This is airtight. Patricia tried desperately to regain control. We're prepared to cooperate fully with federal authorities. Ms. Martinez will be terminated immediately. We'll implement comprehensive anti-discrimination training. Maya finally looked up from her tablet, her gaze sharp as a blade. Ms. Hawthorne, termination does not erase federal criminal charges. Your employee committed felony destruction of government property. Criminal prosecution will proceed regardless of her employment status. The marshals moved in. Cold metal, cuffs clicked around Brenda's wrists as she broke down in tears. Her uniform, streaked with the ashes of Maya's destroyed passport, bore witness to the crime. I didn't know it was real, she sobbed. It looked fake. I swear it looked fake. Ignorance of federal law is not a defense. Prosecutor. Kim replied flatly. Federal crimes carry federal consequences, regardless of intent or knowledge. Maya turned to Patricia with quiet, devastating authority. Your airline faces immediate enforcement actions. Certificate review begins Monday. All gate operations will be subject to federal monitoring until compliance is verified. Patricia's lawyers punched frantic numbers into their tablets. One muttered, "Federal monitoring costs average $2.3 million monthly per major hub. A compliance review will take 18 to 24 months. Our stock price has already dropped 12% since the live stream went viral." CFO Robert Martinez's panicked voice crackled through on Patricia's emergency phone. "Federal charges against our employee for burning a federal agent's passport. Market confidence is collapsing by the minute." Maya delivered the next blow with clinical finality. Federal Aviation Regulation. Part 129 authorizes immediate suspension of operating privileges for airlines whose employees commit federal crimes during passenger processing. Your certificate covers 847 daily flights across 17 states. Each suspended route represents $2.8 million in lost daily revenue. Fines average $125,000 per incident. Legal defense will cost you at least $15 million. Patricia's face was ashen. What do you need from us to minimize federal action?" Maya tapped her tablet, scrolling through enforcement requirements as if reading from a shopping list. "Immediate implementation of federal bias. Monitoring systems at all 127 gates. Estimated cost, $3.2 million. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all 2,147 frontline employees. Annual cost, $1.8 million. Creation of a federal compliance officer position reporting directly to the Department of Transportation. Annual compensation, $350,000. Installation of real-time discrimination detection software across all gates. Implementation cost, $4.7 million. Monthly audit fees, $180,000. Establishment of a victim compensation fund. Minimum $10 million. The lawyers scribbled madly, adding figures that quickly surpassed $23 million in the first year alone. Patricia's voice cracked as she whispered almost to herself, $23 million in the first year. Maya's expression didn't soften. Her voice was calm, clinical, and merciless. That is the price of negligence. That is the cost of deliberate indifference. And that is the unavoidable consequence of destroying the credentials of a federal inspector in front of nearly 1 million witnesses. Federal criminal prosecution of Ms. Brenda Martinez moved forward with unstoppable force, completely independent of any corporate compliance measures the airline attempted to hurriedly implement. Maya, standing with quiet authority, emphasized this distinction with razor-sharp clarity. "These reforms you're scrambling to adopt," she explained to Patricia Hawthorne and her team of shaken attorneys, "address only the civil rights violations and your contractual obligations under federal transportation law. They do not and cannot erase the criminal liability of your employee. That process belongs to the Department of Justice. Criminal charges have already been filed. The court will take its course." Deputy U.S. Marshal Rebecca Santos, her tactical vest still marked with the dust of travel, stepped forward into the flashing lights of cameras that had been rolling non-stop for over 2 hours. In a steady, practiced voice that carried across the terminal, she began to read Brenda her Miranda rights. Hundreds of passengers, who only an hour earlier had seen Brenda strutting with smug confidence, now watched her tremble as each word landed like a hammer. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a federal court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, a federal public defender will be appointed. To you." The irony was devastating. The woman who had brazenly incinerated Maya's passport in full view of a crowd was now reduced to a criminal defendant, handcuffed in her own uniform, with the world as witness. Maya's tablet chimed again, projecting cold lines of enforcement data across the terminal wall. "Miss Hawthorne," she said evenly, "your airline has precisely 72 hours to submit a comprehensive compliance plan to the Department of Transportation. Failure to do so will trigger emergency federal authority under Title 49 and result in immediate suspension of your operating certificates." The large boarding display screens above them flickered, showing Maya's original flight, Flight 447, delayed indefinitely pending investigation. Patricia's lips tightened as the bitter irony struck. The very discrimination that had prompted Maya's investigation had now ignited a firestorm that threatened to ground the entire airline's operations. Patricia, pale and shaken, asked in a whisper that could barely escape her throat, "How long will this federal monitoring continue?" Maya closed her tablet with deliberate finality. "Until the Department of Transportation determines that your airline has achieved consistent, demonstrable compliance with anti-discrimination requirements. Based on current violation patterns, that oversight will last no less than 5 years. Gasps rippled through the crowd. 5 years of federal presence at every gate was not just oversight. It was a slow, crushing transformation of the company. Itself, federal crime scene investigators arrived in a surge of methodical professionalism. They cordoned off the area, photographed the charred remains of Maya's passport, and carefully documented the melted federal seal still visible in the wastebasket. Passengers were escorted one by one to provide signed witness statements. The live stream footage was synchronized with physical evidence, creating an airtight record of federal crime in progress. Maya's phone buzzed with notifications, 17 missed calls from national media outlets. Headlines were already blazing across every network. Airline employee burns federal agent's passport on live stream. Assistant U.S. Attorney David Kim arrived at the scene, his briefcase snapping open as he reviewed evidence. "Chief Inspector," he addressed Maya respectfully, "do you require a medical evaluation? Destruction of your federal identification interferes with your duties. Under statute, this may constitute assault on a federal officer." Patricia's head jerked up, realizing with horror that the implications were far worse than even she had calculated. This wasn't just property destruction. It was an attack on federal authority itself, carrying mandatory prison terms. The showdown was over. The scales of justice had shifted completely. Maya had documented every angle of liability, criminal, civil, contractual, until the airline's empire of negligence lay exposed. Federal marshals escorted Brenda away, her once pristine blazer smeared with the ashes of a passport that had now become evidence. 3 months later, inside a grand Chicago federal courthouse, the gavel of Judge Margaret Carter struck wood with finality. Brenda Martinez, dressed not in her airline uniform but in stark orange prison scrubs, stood to hear her sentence. "Ms. Martinez," the judge intoned, "you have pleaded guilty to federal destruction of government property under 18 U.S.C. Section 1361. This court sentences you to 36 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years supervised release. Your actions represented a direct assault on the authority of federal law enforcement. Such behavior will not be tolerated." Brenda's tears fell silently. The ashes of Maya's passport had been admitted as evidence, each fragment a testament to her downfall. Maya, seated in the gallery, watched with quiet satisfaction. In her briefcase lay her replacement passport, pristine and official. Unlike the one Brenda had destroyed, this document carried not only her authority, but also the weight of transformation, the beginning of a new era in civil rights enforcement within aviation. Weeks later, in Washington, D.C., cameras flashed as Secretary of Transportation Maria Rodriguez signed the Aviation Civil Rights Enhancement Act into law, a direct legislative consequence of the O'Hare incident. Maya stood at her side, recognized now not just as a federal inspector, but as a director within the newly established Civil Rights Enforcement Division. The law mandated real-time AI-powered monitoring at all major airports, recording and analyzing every passenger interaction for discriminatory behavior. "These systems," Maya explained at the press conference, "are designed to detect bias in speech, tone, and behavior patterns within seconds, triggering immediate federal intervention when violations occur." O'Hare International Airport's Gate B12, once infamous for the burning of a passport, had been transformed into a living monument of reform. Digital monitors displayed real-time discrimination statistics. Gate agents wore body cameras feeding directly into Department of Transportation servers, and a bronze plaque was unveiled. Dedicated to equal treatment under law. Tom Rodriguez, once a nervous manager under Patricia, now served as the Federal Compliance Director, reporting proudly that discrimination complaints had dropped by 89% in 3 months. Sarah Carter, the teenager whose live stream had gone viral, had been recruited as a federal student ambassador. "My video has been seen over 47 million times," she told an audience at a civil rights conference. It shows that ordinary bystanders with a phone can hold systems accountable when those in power fail to act. In her new office, at FAA headquarters, Maya kept one framed artifact above her desk, the burned, half-destroyed photo from her old passport. For her, it was no longer a symbol of destruction, but of rebirth, a reminder that justice, once set in motion, could not be stopped. In her congressional testimony, she summarized the transformation. "Since the O'Hare passport burning, we've documented over 1,200 discrimination incidents nationwide, secured $127 million in compliance fines, and forced systematic reform across the entire aviation industry. One act of hate triggered an era of accountability." The lesson was brutal but clear. Discrimination could bankrupt corporations, ruin reputations, and destroy lives. But it could also fuel systemic reform when confronted with the unflinching authority of federal law. Brenda's burning of a passport had once been an act of arrogance. Now it stood immortalized as the catalyst that redefined civil rights enforcement in American aviation. Implementation was no longer an abstract promise. It had become a lived reality. Under Maya Johnson's leadership, her federal enforcement team had partnered with cutting-edge artificial intelligence firms to develop the world's most sophisticated bias detection systems. Unlike traditional human observation, which was vulnerable to fatigue, subjectivity, and oversight, these systems processed thousands of microvariables in real time. They analyzed vocal stress patterns, word choice, body language cues, interaction, duration, and even the timing of procedural steps. Every passenger interaction, from document verification to boarding calls, was logged, analyzed, and compared against statistical baselines. Gate agents now wore lightweight monitoring devices, embedded into their ID lanyards, capturing audio and biometric interaction data. The system instantly flagged any instance where minority passengers were treated differently from white passengers who presented identical documentation. In practice, this meant that bias could be identified and corrected before it escalated into humiliation or denial of service. "The system prevents discrimination at its root," Maya explained to a summit of international aviation officials in Geneva. "Real-time intervention means we stop bias in its tracks, rather than scrambling to repair damage after dignity has already been violated." Airlines soon discovered an unexpected benefit. The very systems designed to catch discrimination also improved service for all passengers. When agents followed uniform, transparent procedures, overall efficiency soared. Queues moved faster. Customer satisfaction scores rose across every demographic group. What had begun as a federal mandate born from scandal became a competitive advantage. The legal impact of the case was equally transformative. The federal conviction of Brenda Martinez in United States versus Martinez established binding precedent with sweeping consequences. No longer could employees dismiss civil rights violations against federal investigators as mistakes or personal disputes. Professor Jennifer Walsh of Columbia Law School described the ruling as a seismic shift in federal jurisprudence. The case had been cited in 73 subsequent federal decisions within 3 years. Courts now recognize that discrimination directed at federal agents during civil rights investigations constituted obstruction of justice, carrying enhanced penalties under expanded federal statutes. The ashes of Maya's passport were no longer just fragments of paper. They were legal bedrock anchoring a new era of accountability. Yet Maya herself had refused to make the moment about personal gain. When offered victim compensation for the destruction of her passport, she declined. Instead, she directed the $2.3 million fund toward the creation of a federal civil rights education initiative. "My passport was burned," she told a packed civil rights summit, her voice calm and resolute. "But my authority was never destroyed. Individual acts of discrimination, when properly documented and prosecuted, can fuel change far greater than any one person." Her decision rippled outward. Schools across the nation added the O'Hare incident to civics curricula, teaching young people how dignity under pressure and evidence-based action could outlast even the most blatant hatred. The results were astonishing. Within 6 months, discrimination complaints in aviation had dropped 73% nationwide. Federal audits showed faster passenger processing times when discriminatory extra checks were eliminated. The Martinez conviction fundamentally reshaped aviation culture, Secretary of Transportation Rodriguez declared in a landmark address. For decades, bias persisted behind closed gates. Now the fear of federal prosecution has ended impunity. Compliance is no longer optional. It is survival. The story crossed oceans. European Union regulators passed laws mandating similar bias monitoring requirements for all airlines in EU airspace. The African Union and ASEAN aviation authorities soon followed suit. United Nations Human Rights Commissioner Dr. Amara Okafor called the O'Hare passport incident a defining moment in the globalization of civil rights enforcement. What had begun with ashes in a Chicago terminal now stood as a worldwide symbol. Maya Johnson's steady professionalism under fire had become the case study for how one incident, captured on video, could ignite international reform. In Maya's FAA office years later, the most precious artifact she owned was not an award, a medal, or even her new passport. It was the charred fragment of the old one, framed above her desk. Half her face was obliterated in black ash, but the surviving half showed her eyes, calm, focused, unbroken. That fragment, she often told visitors, is the most powerful piece of evidence in federal civil rights history, because from those ashes came an entirely new system of justice. Even Brenda Martinez's fate spoke volumes. After serving 28 months in federal prison, she emerged into a world where her old career was gone forever. By court order, she could never again work in customer-facing roles in transportation. Instead, she taught bias awareness workshops at a community center. At a restorative justice panel, her voice cracked as she confessed, "I destroyed more than a passport that day. I destroyed my freedom, my livelihood, my family's stability. Worst of all, I tried to destroy another person's dignity, and I did it in front of the world." Her remorse, though genuine, was a stark reminder that prejudice carried catastrophic consequences. Meanwhile, Maya's calm and methodical response had been elevated into doctrine. Her evidence collection strategies, document everything, preserve composure, use legitimate authority, were adopted by the Department of Justice as standard federal enforcement protocol. Law schools and police academies studied her methods. Her name appeared in UN human rights publications. What had once been an isolated humiliation had become a global training model for civil rights enforcement. The systemic transformation was staggering. The aviation industry invested $347 million in bias prevention technology across 892 airports. Federal monitoring now processed over 2.7 million daily passenger interactions. Bias complaints in transportation had plummeted 84% since the passport burning incident. Airline CEOs admitted, sometimes grudgingly, that equal treatment actually reduced costs and delays. Fairness was not only just, it was efficient. Even Sarah Carter, the teenager whose shaky live stream had captured everything, turned her moment of accidental activism into a national movement. At 21, she directed the National Student Documentation Network, training thousands of young people to safely record incidents of discrimination for federal evidence. Maya showed us that dignity and evidence change systems more than anger ever could, Sarah told a high school assembly. My phone video helped convict a federal criminal and protect millions of future travelers. If I could do it at 16, you can do it too. Maya herself had expanded her mission far beyond airports. Her protocols were applied to discrimination in healthcare, retail, banking, and public service offices. At the International Civil Rights Conference, she summarized the philosophy that had changed the world. Quiet authority achieves more than loud anger. Federal law provides powerful tools, but only if we use them strategically with evidence and composure. The deeper truth of her story was simple yet profound. Discriminatory hatred had tried to erase her identity, but instead elevated her into a global figure of reform. Brenda's arrogance had backfired spectacularly. What was intended as an act of humiliation became a symbol of resilience and professionalism. The ashes of one passport ignited a revolution that transformed an entire industry, influenced global law, and protected millions from ever experiencing the same injustice. And now the story was not just Maya's, it was ours. Discrimination still lurked in airports, restaurants, retail stores, hospitals, and government offices. But Maya's legacy proved that prepared citizens armed with evidence and the courage to report could transform injustice into reform. So the call went out. Document discrimination safely. Record incidents respectfully. Report to the proper federal agencies, Department of Transportation for Aviation, Department of Justice for Civil Rights. Share your evidence with civil rights groups. Support training in your communities, because one burned passport had already proven what could happen when a single injustice was confronted the right way. The question was, what could happen when millions of people followed that example?